You ever been in a discussion between photographers where they start arguing on how good their flash units are? There are those that swear that the low-end devices are perfect. They are good as the high-end devices. Well, I'm not sure. The guys that own the high-end devices, they will say, well, the cheap end, the cheap stuff, the Chinese stuff, it's worth nothing. And they swear by Bowens, Broncolor, ProLite. And I can't really say that they are wrong or right. But in essence, I think they are right and they are wrong. In absolute terms, the high-end devices are absolutely far superior to the low-end devices. There's no doubt about that. And this can be measured, this can be proven. However, the low-end devices, they're very cheap and they could be very good as well. It all depends on what you want to use them for. Just imagine that you are a person who only needs a car to get to donuts on Sunday morning and the store is only 5 miles away or 5 clicks. You don't really need an expensive car. I mean, a very cheap, economical car will just take you there and bring you back. Oh, sure, you have no gadgets. Sure, you have not all the safety in the car and it uses a bit more fuel and you don't have a high-end maintenance plan on the car and it's not that reliable. But hey, you only need it for about 10 minutes a week, so it will just do the job for you, right? But on the other hand, if you're a guy that has to do a lot of mileage and you have to make a living with your car, then things are a bit different. You need a car which is then reliable, it's safe, low on fuel consumption, low maintenance, and if it breaks down, you want to make sure that it gets replaced very quickly and even you get a replacement car while your car would be in maintenance. And it's the same thing with flash units. If you're a professional shooter and you needed to make your living with it, go and buy a decent brand. Go and buy the high-end devices. You got the guarantee. If you're an occasional shooter and you don't really use it a lot, well, buy the low-end devices. They're reasonable. They're good enough for what you need it for. Now, making the choice of what you want is not always easy, because there's a lot of things to think about once you decide to buy a flash unit. Now that we killed the debate on the good and the bad, let's talk a bit about the different types of flash units. I'm not going to start talking about speed lights like this one. We all know those and how they work. Typically those are the types that you mount on top of your camera on your hot shoe. And then you're kind of ready to shoot with automatic measuring and so on. So we're not going to talk about this. We will talk, however, about the parameters of flash units. And to be very honest, studio flashes like those have the same parameters as a speed light, but the use is a bit different. So I'm going to put this one aside for now because we are not going to talk in this video about the speed light. Right, so in essence you have two main types of flash units. It is what they call the monoblock, where everything is self-contained. The power supply, the control units, the bulb, the light shapers, everything is in one unit. This is one flash unit. That's why they call it the monoblock. It requires mains power and you can dial in all your specific settings, whatever you want, in the front of the unit. If you work in a studio, then you're going to need multiple of those and you will have to make all your adjustments on each one of those units. So I'll turn that back off now because it makes a bit too much noise. And then you have on my left the other type, the lamp types, the lamps, the flashlights that are only a lamp. Inside the softbox there's only a lamp, and the lamp is driven by this unit right here. The power generator or the battery block, and inside this one are all the components that you would find normally in a monoblock flash unit, except the bulb. The bulb is out there, and the bulb is connected basically with different cables. One cable connects to one bulb, which is right here. The second cable connects to the bulb right there. The unit itself, it's quite handy, and all the control functions are inside. Very much so like the mono unit, but all control functions are here for all the bulbs, for all the lights. Everything is inside here, and you can control every individual component with that. It's pretty handy, it's transportable, it's very light. So if you travel a lot and you like to go out shooting in the field, go for a unit like this. This happens to be the Broncolor Move. It's a 1200 watt second unit. Two outputs, individually adjustable, which is great. It's not symmetric, it's asymmetric, and it runs on a battery. It's about good for 300-400 flashes depending on the volume of the flash. The battery is right here, and actually you can remove the battery and put another battery in. Other types, and there are many other brands on the market, have something similar to this. A bit bigger, a bit smaller. Now this is the small brother. There's also the bigger one, and with four, you can drive 4 lamps or even 6 lamps. You can cascade them. There's all kind of options, but in essence, these are the two main groups of flash units. The monoblocks and the power generator blocks, or the battery blocks, whatever you want to call it. A lot of people call it just a generator, and okay, whatever you want to call it. So that's what it is. And today you will find on the market another type, a hybrid, and it's basically a monoblock, but with inside a battery in it. So now you could take your monoblock with a battery, go around in the field, and you don't need your mains, you know, it's great. So you cannot trip over the cable, and you don't need to take a power generator with you in the field. You know, and to be very honest, never use a power generator on your flash units in the field. It's going to kill them. Anyhow, we'll put this back meanwhile. So these are the different types. So now let's talk a bit about what does it really mean? How does it work? Now that you've all been admiring my drawing arts, and it ain't much, I have to admit, we can start talking about how a flash unit actually works and how it operates. It mainly consists out of 5 parts: a power supply, a controller, a capacitor, and a bulb. And the 5th one is the light shaper. The light shaper is your umbrella, it is your reflector, it is your softbox. It's an attachment to the flash unit. It doesn't have any real function on a flash unit except shaping the light. So let's start with the power supply. Well, a flash unit, regardless if it's a monoblock or a generator, it's an electronic device and it's going to need power. And either you are provided with mains power, 220, 110, 50, 60 Hertz, or it's based on a battery, just like this unit right here. Right here is the battery, and it's exchangeable. So the power supply is feeding the whole unit. 2 types, a DC type, battery driven, an AC type, mains driven, or a combination of the two. They do exist as well. The controller is the brain of the unit. The controller requires input from the operator, and this is you dialing in the required amount of light that you desire. How much light you want, this is something you had to figure out with your light meter. But I'm not going to get into light meters right now, that's something for later. At the front of your unit, you have push buttons to increase or decrease the power. So the controller will measure the exact amount of power you need depending on your input, either on a dial, a push button, or a sliding switch. This can be continuous, so you can increase it gradually, or it can be in steps of 1/3 of a stop or even 1 stop. The cheaper models they tend to be able to go to full power, but they usually cannot go that deep down. They typically drop down to about, you know, 1/3, 2/3, but they cannot go all the way down in power. The more expensive components, they can do a bit better, but you will see that the lower boundary is often a bit of an issue. Nevertheless, the controller also has another function. Once you've decided how much power you want, the controller will be responsible for loading up the capacitor, but I'll come back to this one in a minute. The other function of the controller is the trigger. Somehow the flash unit has to be triggered. Now typically on a camera you have the hot shoe on the top, and that's where there is a DC closure. If you look close, you will see the little contacts, and there's a closure made between them, and then typically the flash which is mounted on it goes off. So now the trick is, how do we convey this DC closure from the camera to the flash unit, be it the generator or the monoblock? Well, that has been done in many different ways. You can either use the traditional flash cord, as we have here. One side would connect to your flash unit, and the other side would connect to the front of your camera, where you have a flash or a sync contact. That way you can trigger. Now it's a bit of an annoyance because you always have this cable hanging around you, so you can trip over it. I mean, I would not use it. I mean, I would rather invest in a remote trigger of some sort, a trigger which is tuned towards your unit. And this specific one is a infrared, is a radio trigger. The infrared does exist as well, but it's not as recommended. Infrared is always a bit of an issue. You know, it won't work around the corner, or the distance is limited. With radio frequencies, you don't have that issue. You can combine them in groups. You can have multiple flash units, and you can individually control them, and you even have the ability to increase or decrease the power remotely. These are the better types. Typically they come with the flash units, or you can buy pocket wizards of something similar like that, or Cactus or something like that. They normally mount on top of your camera, and then basically you are ready to shoot, and once you aim, you focus and you push through, then the trigger will go off. The DC contact will close, the radio trigger receives it, and it will send the radio signal back to its unit, allowing it to go off. It's exactly the radio part would be sitting right here and there, and then of course it would flash. There you go. Now take it a step further. We just saw the flash, and I hope it was visible on the video, but how did the flash really happen? We just talked about the controller now, what it all does, the trigger and the input, and it has a couple of other little functions like a delay. You can have multiple flashes in a row, sequential. You have the ability to have a pilot light, so a modeling light as people call it, so the model doesn't sit in the dark. You know, it sounds stupid, but a modeling light is great, especially when the modeling light is proportional. So the more power you request from the flash, the brighter the modeling light will be. So you see a bit of what the effect will be. But I really like a modeling light because the iris of the eye is getting smaller. If you let your model sit in the dark, the eyes will be wide open, and it looks a bit awkward sometimes on a picture. You know, I'd rather see the nice colors of the eyes than the blank spot. Anyway, the capacitor, if not the heart of the unit, that's where the big price difference comes in. Now, a capacitor is a reservoir. It's a tank. Let's say it's a fuel tank. It's where you put a certain charge in it, and the charge that you put in there depends on how much you request it through the controller. It is the controller that regulates the charge. So the capacitor will be charged with power from the power supply up to a certain level, and once it reaches that level, it has to stop. Now, how much it fills up depends on how much power you have requested for the flash. Now, a capacitor in essence is nothing more than two metal plates, and in the middle you have an insulation. And the insulation in the middle is what we call the dielectricum. And the two plates, one on the left, one on the right, is either charged negative and positive. And we all know that uneven charges attract each other, so the whole load stays together. It tries to level out, but it can't, just because that insulation factor is there. So once a capacitor is charged up, loaded up to a certain point equal to your input, the controller stops the loading of the capacitor. Now your flash unit is armed. It's ready to go off. It's ready to be triggered. The moment that you depress the button on your camera, the trigger comes in. The controller then discharges the capacitor really quickly over the flash bulb. And the flash bulb is kind of a very thin wire of special material, and when a charge is going through it, it generates light. A very short-lived pulse. That's the function of the light bulb. Nothing more, nothing less. After the flash has flashed off, the capacitor will recharge again under the control of the controller, again to the level that you've set it. So I said before that the capacitor is probably the most important component besides the controller. This is very important because it requires precision. If you want 50 watts, you don't want 55 or 65, you want 50 or 45. No, you want 50. And that's exactly the role of the capacitor. Now, low-end units, they tend to have only 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 capacitors. The more expensive types, they have far bigger capacitors and many more capacitors. And they put them in cascade or in series, and that's what allows them to be so precise always with the charge, no matter how much you put in, which you can't say from the cheaper versions. I mean, they tend to vary a bit. Now, there's another aspect of the capacitor, is that how long can it hold the charge? Remember, once it's charged up, you're in your studio shooting around and talking to your model and getting it ready, and you talk a bit. It can take minutes before you actually fire off the flash. Now, cheaper capacitors, they have what we call a leak current, and the charges that we have on the two plates, they will penetrate through the dielectricum, the insulation, slowly but certainly, and the charge in the capacitor will actually go down. And after about 5 to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, you won't have the accurate charge anymore that was initially loaded in it. And the good quality flash units, they keep that up very well for a long time. You often see as well that people in studios, when they are adjusting the power level, especially when they're decreasing, they trigger off the capacitor one time, just to empty it and make sure that we have the right level again, and it charges up again, and it comes back and it charges up to the right level. However, the better types, well, you can decrease the power and the controller will start draining a bit of this power out of it automatically, so you don't have to discharge the capacitor first before you do your shooting. So there's a lot of things out there to think about. Once you start buying the flash unit, think about those things. And there's a lot to be said about the capacitor. There's a lot about how long the flash unit is. The flash time, I mean, and the T1 and the T5 times are critical because that will freeze your picture. I'll give you shortly another explanation on the T1 and T5 pulse lengths in a few minutes. But overall, this is how the flash unit is working. So if you will buy a flash unit, the first thing you need to consider is, well, my power supply. What do I want? Do I want a AC driven unit like these, the monoblocks? Yeah, it could be a good choice. Do I want it to have a dual voltage, or do I want to have a generator based unit, or do I want to have the hybrid? Remember, the hybrid was a monoblock with a battery inside. That all depends where you work. If you work studio, go for a monoblock, I would say. But if you're a lot on the road and on certain scenes, outside in nature, whatever, I would probably go for something light, and I would probably go for a battery-based version. So that's one thing. Now, we did mention power, right? And I forgot to refer to kilowatt second. The strength of a light pulse or flash is expressed in watts per second, or joule, and it defines how much light is being produced. Studio flashes typically go between 250 watts second to 1600 watts second. Do you need 1600 watts second? No, probably not in a studio. Again, it all depends what you do. If you tend to make pictures of big groups of people, then you're going to need a lot of light, and you're going to need a lot of power. That's one thing. So you might need more power. If you only do very simple things and small things, or just portraits of individuals, well, you can get by with 250 watts. So that depends a bit on what you do. If you like to go out and you like to shoot night by day, so you blow away the sunlight, and wherever you had sunlight, that becomes dark and your object becomes bright, then you're going to need a lot of power, and you might be able to swing it with 1600 watts second. But that's maybe not even enough. It all depends a bit on the light situations. So yeah, what do you need? Again, it depends on what kind of work you do, and the more power you require from the unit, the more expensive it will be, because it will have a bigger capacitor, it has bigger power supplies, it's heavier, it's bigger, so it's going to be more expensive. So think about that, but don't believe that you're going to get away only with 250 watts flash units. You're going to need a variation in it if you really want to do proper work. Remember as well that I said before that when adjusting the flash unit, you always can go full power, but coming down in power, you will find the lower boundary, typically around 1/3 of the volume. Now, very good flash units, they can go really deep down to 1/4 of the full power, but less good quality ones, they're even stuck at half. And now that brings us back to the controller now, based on the input. It is nice to have a adjustable slider of power, gradual, when you can just, that you're not stuck with stops or half stops. And yes, I know you can move the light more back or more forward to compensate for that step, but it's not very comfortable. So that adjustment is nice. As I said before, the pilot light, it's nice to have as well in the controller, that it is proportional to the power you put in. And then the trigger options. You can go for a cheap unit and just say, well, I just need a sync contact, and I plug my cactus in there, or I will plug in my whatever trigger system that you buy from a third party. It doesn't really matter. A pocket wizard of some sort. Yeah, you can do that. But again, it's another box. It's another thing you need to take care of. It's another thing that can fail. So I would rather go for built-in devices, but then again, that's what I use, and I like built-in radio systems that come with the system. I've got it in here, my remote trigger, it's handy, it can go a long distance, and it can work in groups. I know, Pocket Wizard can go in groups as well. It's a bit the same, but again, it's less equipment in this case versus a Pocket Wizard and so on. Price-wise, I think this is about the same price. This might be a little bit more, but nevertheless, it's what you like. So, working in groups is always nice, especially working in larger studios. So the different lights that you have around, they all have a unique address, and you can control them all remotely from the flash trigger, or you do it on the unit itself, or if it's a monoblock, on the monoblocks. So that's all about the controller. Now the capacitor, we talked a lot about that. This is all about the flash duration. It's the very nature of a capacitor to quickly charge up in the beginning, and towards the end it starts slowing down when you charge it. And it's important that we can actually charge it very quickly, right? We don't want to wait 15 minutes or 15 seconds or whatever before a capacitor is loaded up. It's got to go quick, so it goes real quick at the beginning and then it starts to slow down. The battery types, they are pretty good all the way around up to the top for charging up. Then we want to make sure that it can hold this charge pretty well, and then when it discharges, it creates a pulse across the light bulb. Now that pulse is the most critical thing. It is exactly that pulse that will freeze the motion in your picture. Remember, you're shooting with a camera at 1/125th of a second. That's your sync time, unless you have a leaf shutter lens, which then go up to 1/1600 of a second or whatever. But let's think about it. In the normal world, 1/25th of a second is your normal sync time for flash. That's a long time. So if you have somebody to jump in front of a flash unit, you can freeze them, right? And normally with 1/125th of a second shutter time, you can't really freeze anybody. But it's because the flash pulse which is generated is a fraction of 125. It's a very short-lived pulse, and that is freezing the action. And the shorter the pulse, the better the freezing will be. Now, again, flashing is discharging the capacitor, and just like charging is going very quickly when it was charging up, discharging is going very quickly at the beginning, very fast, and then it dies out slowly. Now, this is what we call the toll curve, and the problem with that is that cheaper end devices, the discharge curve of this capacitor is quick and then it drags on. It's a slow dim of your light. So your T5 pulse, which is the bottom layer, the T5 time becomes quite long. And therefore the pulse length overall is a bit extended and the freezing won't be that good. So if you're really after freezing shots, go for a flash unit with a very short T1, T5 time of the pulse. That's very important. The other aspect which is critical is the light temperature. And we all know the degrees of Kelvin and all this. So a light bulb is 2800 degrees Kelvin, daylight is 5000 degrees Kelvin, and so on. I'm not going to get into this one right now, but because we have a light bulb and because we will have different charges going through it, for instance, if you are on the low volume, a little bit of charge, you dial in a low charge here, capacitor loads up a little bit, there's a little bit of power to be discharged across the light bulb. So the filament, the wire inside the bulb, won't emit light enough. It will emit enough light, but the temperature of the metal is lower than for a huge charge. So you're gonna get different light temperature colors. Now, the cheap versions, they do vary quite a bit, and I've seen variations of about 1000 degrees Kelvin between the maximum power and the minimum power of a unit. Now that's a lot. Now, of course, you could say, well, I don't care about that. I have my gray card and I will adjust it in post-processing. Sure, you can, but it's all work and it's all time. And if you work for your living, then time is money. So you don't want to mess around with that stuff. Instead, you want to have a light bulb or a flash unit that is able to give you consistent light temperature no matter how much power you dialed in or dialed out. So these are the critical elements to consider once you start buying that. But it's not everything, right? If you go for a battery-based solution, how many flashes can you trigger at full power before the battery runs empty? It's a nightmare to be out there and your battery is empty. So that's another thing to consider. The battery types, there are all kind of battery types on the market. One is better than the other one. So think about that, see how many flashes you can do at full power. If you decide to go for a generator type of flash unit, well, check out how many bulbs can you attach to it. Remember, this specific unit only has 2. Well, it's light, but it only has 2. The good thing about it is, it's asymmetric. It means I can dial in the strength of every light, of every flash individually. Other units in this kind of family, you'll see that the two outputs are symmetric, they are identical. So if you set the power to 50%, both will have 50% of the power. So you cannot adjust the bulbs individually. So there's a lot of differences in between. And then of course we have all the other aspects like the build. How strong is the build? Is it rigid? Is it waterproof? Can I take it out in the field or not? Can I get easy spare parts? This is all questions you should ask yourself before you actually go and buy a flash unit. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope I could help you a bit. The bottom line of all this is every flash unit is good as long as it meets your requirements. Thank you for watching.